I always believed I was my dad's favorite. As a little girl, I'd sit on his lap in his home office, pretending to read law books while he made calls for his business. He'd smile, call me his tiny attorney, and let me pretend I was part of the board meetings by scribbling on yellow notepads. He even framed one of those scribbles and hung it above his desk. Back then, I believed my future was secure. I believed if I worked hard, stayed out of trouble, and kept my grades up, he'd support my dream of becoming a lawyer. I was wrong. My name is Emily Carson. I grew up in Houston, Texas, the youngest of three, and the only girl. My two older brothers, Daniel and Kyle, were always the loud ones, always the stars. Daniel followed Dad into finance. Kyle took over the real estate side of Dad's business, and me, I was the quiet one, the straight-A student, the reader, the one who got into debates at dinner, quoting case law and court rulings, while everyone else just laughed and called me too intense. I never thought my passion would become a problem. The first real sign that something was wrong came my senior year of high school. I got accepted to Yale. Pre-law. Full scholarship. I was over the moon. My mom cried. My brothers gave me half-hearted congratulations. And my dad, he nodded and said, "Well, I just hope it doesn't make you even more emotional than you already are." I laughed, thinking he was joking. But then he added, "Law's a tough game, Em. You don't always handle stress well. Remember that time you broke down over a B in chemistry?" I blinked. That was in ninth grade. He just sipped his coffee and shrugged. Something about that moment sat heavy in my chest. But I pushed it down. Yale was hard, but I loved it. The debates, the reading, the mock trials. I was exactly where I was meant to be. Except every time I came home, my dad made comments. "You look tired. Are you sure this is the right path? You could always work in PR or something less aggressive." Aggressive. He used that word a lot. Once, I overheard him on the phone with a client saying, "My daughter, oh, she's trying the law thing, but she's a little too soft for it." That one stung, but I didn't say anything. Not yet. By the time I was in my second year of law school, I started interning at a law firm downtown. It was small but fierce. The lead attorney, Vanessa Barnes, was a powerhouse, and she took me under her wing. She said I had something most law students didn't. Fire with control, she called it. You get emotional, but it's focused, and that's rare. Use it. Her words meant the world to me. So when I went home for winter break and told my dad I was helping with a wrongful termination case, I thought he'd be proud. Instead, he looked almost worried. "What kind of termination?" he asked. "A woman at a tech company. They let her go right after she complained about harassment." He went quiet, then said, "Well, there's two sides to every story. Some people sue just to stir things up." I tilted my head. "You think she's making it up?" He didn't answer. That Christmas, everything cracked. We were sitting at the table. My dad was holding court as usual, bragging about a recent acquisition his company had made. He joked about cutting dead weight from the HR department and how a few snowflakes couldn't handle the pressure. And then he looked right at me and said, "Hopefully my daughter doesn't end up defending someone like them." I froze. Then I said quietly, "If they were wrongfully terminated, I absolutely would." Silence. Daniel laughed. Kyle smirked. And my dad leaned back and said, "That's the problem. You don't know when to stop fighting. That kind of thinking isn't going to get you far in real courtrooms." Something broke inside me that night. Not anger, not sadness. Resolve. The next semester, I doubled down. I took more hours. I joined a legal ethics club. I helped with a class action filing, and I stopped calling home. My mom noticed. She left voicemails. "Your dad misses you," she'd say. "He's just old-fashioned. Don't hold it against him." But I was tired of being told to overlook things. Tired of making myself smaller to keep peace. Then one day, Vanessa came into the office and handed me a manila folder. "We're taking on a case," she said. "It's a bit messy, and there's a connection to your hometown, but I want your eyes on it." I opened it. My stomach dropped. It was a wrongful termination lawsuit filed against my father's company by a woman named Marisol Vega, former project manager, fired 6 months earlier. The reason? Personality mismatch. The real reason? She'd reported racial bias and gender discrimination to HR, then suddenly, she was not a culture fit. Vanessa didn't know my connection yet, but I couldn't ignore it. I had to tell her, so I did. She stared at me for a moment, then said, "I won't put you on this if you're uncomfortable." I shook my head. "I want in." I started digging, reading every document, every HR memo, every exit interview, and what I found made my blood run cold. Not just Marisol, but 6 others, all women, all people of color, all let go within a 2-year span, all after filing internal complaints, and the signatures on the termination approvals, my father's, every single one. Part of me wanted to scream, part of me wanted to cry, but the biggest part of me felt clear. For years my dad said I was too emotional for law. Now, I saw that emotion wasn't weakness, it was a compass. It pointed me straight toward justice. I didn't confront him, not yet. Instead I focused. I met with Marisol. She was sharp, kind, and terrified of going up against a powerful company. But when she found out I was from Houston and who my father was, she blinked, then said, "Are you sure you can do this?" I said absolutely, and I meant. The firm moved forward with the case. Depositions were scheduled, evidence was gathered, and eventually, a court date was set. My dad still had no idea I was involved, but that was going to change, soon. Very soon. I never thought I'd be sitting across from my father's lawyers, reading a deposition that included phrases like hostile work environment, systemic discrimination, and cover-up. But there I was, at 24, fresh out of law school. Not only was I doing it, I was leading part of the team. Vanessa let me take the lead on pretrial research, interviews, and prep. And once she saw the passion and focus I brought, she stopped treating me like an intern and started calling me counsel. I didn't tell my dad I was involved in the case. I didn't have to. He found out on his own. And when he did, all hell broke loose. It happened one afternoon when I came home for a quick visit. My mom had asked me to stop by. She said Dad wanted to talk things out. I didn't know what to expect, but I didn't expect this. The moment I walked in, he was standing in the kitchen, arms crossed, face red. A file folder was open on the counter, the official court filing. He slammed his palm on it. "You're involved in this?" I didn't flinch. "Yes, I am." His voice rose. "Against me? Against your own family?" I said calmly. "I'm not against you. I'm standing with the people you hurt." He laughed. This bitter, angry laugh. "This is exactly what I meant when I said you're too emotional. You let your feelings cloud your judgment." I looked him straight in the eye. "No, Dad. I let them guide my purpose. There's a difference." My mom tried to intervene, but it was no use. He ranted about loyalty, betrayal, family values. He accused me of being used, of letting some ambitious female lawyer twist me into attacking my own blood. I said, "Vanessa didn't twist anything. I read the documents. I read your emails. I saw the timelines. It's all there, Dad." He shouted, "I built everything you have. I paid for your education." I nodded. "And you used that power to silence women who worked for you." "I won't protect that." He pointed at the door. "You want to act like a stranger? Get out of my house." So I did. I stayed with a friend that night. But I didn't cry. Not this time. I had cried enough, in silence, in private, over years of being dismissed, talked over, second-guessed. Now, I was focused. I returned to the office the next day and told Vanessa everything. She didn't hesitate. "You still in?" I nodded, more than ever. She placed a supportive hand on my shoulder. "Then let's build a case, so solid it makes them wish they'd settled when they had the chance." As the case grew, more former employees came forward. Some were scared, others were angry, but all of them had stories that lined up, patterns that proved the culture at Carson Holdings wasn't just toxic, It was calculated. One woman, Alicia, said she'd been forced to sign a non-disclosure agreement after she reported her manager for inappropriate comment. Another, Kim, had emails where HR told her, "You should try smiling more and dressing less aggressively if you want to be taken seriously." I was stunned, not because I hadn't expected it, but because now we had evidence, and evidence was everything. Meanwhile, my dad was losing control. Public records showed the lawsuit. Word spread. Some business partners pulled out of upcoming deals. My brothers reached out too. Daniel sent a cold text. "This isn't just about Dad. You're affecting all of us. Think about the family." Kyle left a voicemail. "You've made your point. Now drop it before you ruin everything." I didn't respond. Because I wasn't ruining anything. The truth was. And the truth had waited long enough. The media picked up the story. A small news outlet ran a headline: "Houston developer faces discrimination lawsuit. Daughter leads legal effort." The phones at the firm rang nonstop. Vanessa fielded interview requests. I kept my head down and focused on deposition. The more my dad pushed back, the worse it looked. He tried to settle quietly, but Marisol said no. She didn't want hush money. She wanted change. And so did I. The day of my deposition came. Yes, even as a lawyer on the case, I was still my father's daughter, and that made me a relevant witness. I sat across from his attorney, feeling the weight of it all. But I didn't break. I answered every question with honesty. Yes, I'd interned at the firm. Yes, I'd grown up around the company. Yes, I had once admired my father deeply, but when asked if I believed he had discriminated against his employees, I said, yes, I believe the documentation, the patterns, and the testimonies support that conclusion. It's not personal, it's legal, and it's wrong. That quote made the rounds. Blogs, tweets, local news. People started calling me brave. Some called me ungrateful. I didn't care, because something else happened too. Other daughters, other professionals, other women started messaging me. They shared stories about being talked out of dreams, being called too emotional, too loud, too ambitious. And every message reminded me why I started this. Not for revenge, but for justice. Then came the biggest twist. One of my dad's former assistants, a woman named Trina, came forward with internal memos, private documents, ones that showed executive conversations about targeting the complainers, restructuring to remove liabilities, and quiet exits for problem hires. It was damning. My dad tried to claim he didn't know about them, but several were signed with his initial, and Trina had emails showing he'd been directly looped in. The defense began to crack. A week later, the board of Carson Holdings issued a statement. They were placing my father on indefinite leave. An external audit would begin, and a new interim CEO was being appointed. My brother Daniel. Of course, I wasn't shocked, but I was deeply aware. Even when the old guard falls, they try to keep it in the family. I wasn't done yet. Vanessa looked at me across the table that day and said, "You're not just helping win this case, Emily. You're changing how things work." I didn't smile, but I nodded, because I believed her. Later that night I got a call from an unknown number. I picked up. It was my father. His voice was quiet. "You've really done it, huh?" I said nothing. He continued, "You could have come to me first. Talk to me." I finally replied, "You never listened when I tried. You only hear people when they shout in courtrooms." Silence. Then he said, "I never thought you'd go this far." I said, "That's because you never thought I could." Then I hung up. The court date was getting closer. The team was stronger, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely certain I wasn't too emotional. I was exactly who I needed to be. The pressure was building. Every day, I walked into the law office with my head held high, but my stomach in knots. It was like carrying two lives in one body: the daughter of a powerful man in Houston real estate, and the young lawyer helping to bring him down. The closer we got to trial, the more intense things became. Vanessa kept us on schedule like a military command. The woman had an answer for everything, a plan for every turn. But behind the confidence, Even she was beginning to feel the heat. "This case is becoming bigger than we thought," she said one afternoon, tapping her pen against a thick file. "Media is sniffing around, and your dad's PR team is working overtime." I nodded. "He's trying to control the story." Vanessa gave me a look. "But we're holding the truth. Outside of work, things were worse." My family had gone completely silent. No birthday calls, no texts, no check-ins. It was like I had vanished from their lives by choice or force. I couldn't tell. One night, my brother Daniel finally reached out again. This time, it wasn't a warning, it was a guilt trip. "You've embarrassed Dad enough," he wrote. "Whatever this is, whatever point you're trying to make, it's gone too far. You're destroying our family name." I stared at the message for a long time. Destroying? No. Truth didn't destroy anything. It revealed what was already broken. One morning, I arrived early at the firm and found Marisol waiting in the conference room. She had tears in her eyes. "What happened?" I asked, concerned. She opened a folder and slid it toward me. Inside were photos of her car, keyed from end to end, windshield smashed, a note on the hood that read, "Liar. They found out where I live," she whispered. My chest tightened. It was no longer just a court case. Now it was intimidation. I looked at her and said, "We're going to win. I promise." And I meant it. Even if it got harder from here. We started prepping witnesses. Dozens of women who had worked for Carson Holdings over the last 20 years, many with stories too similar to be coincidence. Casual sexism, dismissal of complaint, forced resignations after pregnancy announcements, pay gaps that widened over time. The pattern wasn't a few bad apples. It was the whole tree. I handled most of the interviews. I listened, took notes, asked questions. But more than once I had to excuse myself afterward, just to breathe, not because I was overwhelmed, but because I was angry, and I was done hiding it. The company's legal team was ruthless. They sent investigators to dig into the lives of our clients. Former employees were offered hush settlements if they'd drop out of the case. Some did. I didn't blame them. Not everyone had the strength or safety to fight, but others stayed. And those who did, they were warriors. There was a woman named Janelle, who'd been with the company for 15 years before being pushed out after reporting harassment from a VP. "He said I was too ambitious for a woman," she told me. "I just wanted to do my job." Her voice shook, but her words burned into my mind. Too ambitious for a woman, too emotional for law school. The same poison. I had dinner with Vanessa one night to breathe and talk like real people. We sat in a quiet booth at a small Italian place near the courthouse. She looked at me and said, "You've changed since I met you." I raised an eyebrow. "Better or worse?" She smiled. "Sharper. Still soft, but in a steel way." I laughed. "That sounds like a compliment and a warning." She shrugged. "It's both." I looked down at my plate, then back at her. "Do you ever get tired of being the one pushing the wall uphill?" "All the time," she said. "But it beats pretending it's not there." Then came the leaked memo. A journalist from a local paper called us and said they'd received an anonymous envelope. Inside, internal HR memos from Carson Holdings, including one from my father himself. It read, "Maintain perception of equal opportunity, but avoid promoting based on emotional instability or potential volatility. This applies especially to young female hires with activist backgrounds." It was signed with his initials, CV, Christopher Vaughn. My dad, my own father, labeling women like me as a risk to his empire. The journalist asked if I had a comment. I said one word: proceed. The article hit the internet that evening. It was everywhere by morning. People started tweeting. Former employees began speaking up in public. The media couldn't ignore the storm. And neither could my dad. That same day, I got another call from an unknown number. This time, it was his lawyer. "Your father would like to discuss a resolution. the man said. I smiled. Of course he would. But when I mentioned it to Vanessa, she shook her head. Too soon, she said. He wants to settle before more comes out. That memo was just the beginning. We wait. And she was right, because a week later, Trina, the assistant who had handed over earlier documents, found a backup drive in her old storage unit. Emails, meeting recordings, voicemails, notes, all of it. The skeletons had nowhere left to hide. We went public. Marisol gave an interview to a major network. Vanessa allowed the press to quote parts of the evidence. I posted a single tweet. He said I was too emotional for law school. I say he should have hired more lawyers. It went viral. I didn't expect that. Within a day, it had over 500,000 likes. People started calling me brave, a hero, a daughter with a backbone. But I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like someone finally getting heard. The company's board met that Friday. The news came quickly. Christopher Vaughn, founder and CEO, was stepping down permanently. The firm was under new leadership, and they were cooperating with the lawsuit to avoid further damage. When I read the press release, my hands trembled. Not with fear, with release. Years of being dismissed, erased, told to tone it down, all of it now laid bare for the world to see. I didn't take joy in his fall, but I did feel peace. The settlement came next. Not hush money, not a buyout, but change. Structured reforms inside Carson Holdings. Public apologies. Pay reparations for wrongfully terminated women. Regular audits. New HR leadership. And one more thing, a donation to a legal fellowship in my name, to support young women pursuing law degrees from underrepresented communities. When Vanessa asked if I wanted my name on it, I said yes. For every girl who'd been told she was too much for greatness. The day we signed the final paperwork, my dad showed up at the firm. He didn't come inside. He stood on the sidewalk. I saw him through the window. I walked out alone. He didn't speak at first. He looked tired, smaller somehow. Finally, he said, "You destroyed my life." I looked him dead in the eyes. "No," I said. "You did that. I just made sure no one else would suffer from it." Then I walked back inside and didn't look back. After the press release came out about my father stepping down from Carson Holdings, the entire city was talking. People who used to whisper about my family at charity galas were now tagging me in support posts on Twitter. I had strangers messaging me with their own stories. And yet, none of it felt real. I was back in my apartment one evening, still dressed from the office, eating cold pizza out of the box when Vanessa called me. "You should sit down," she said. "What now?" I asked, already exhausted. "We just got a notice. Your father, he filed a countersuit, defamation, loss of business, mental distress." I dropped the slice mid-bite. "He's suing us?" I asked. "After everything that came out?" "He's suing you," she said quietly. "Personally, not the firm, not the women, just you." It wasn't about money. He didn't want compensation. This was personal now. He wanted to shame me, shut me down, punish me. "You can walk away from this, Emily," Vanessa said, softly. "We have enough to get the company to settle everything. But his countersuit, it's different. Messy, ugly, public." "I'm not afraid," I said. And I wasn't. Not anymore. The weeks that followed were heavy. This wasn't about documents now. It was about me. He was digging up every diary entry I'd ever written, every bad grade from college, every emotional voicemail I'd left my mom in the past 10 years. His lawyers spun a story. Emily Vaughn, angry daughter, mentally unstable, jealous of her father's power, looking for revenge. I read the language in the brief. It felt like being stabbed by your own DNA. But I also knew they were scared. Scared that I'd taken the spotlight, scared that I'd shown the world a mirror, and they were trying to break me again the same way they had when I was 15. By calling me too emotional, we responded with truth. Witnesses, videos, more memos, And then something happened I never expected. Daniel, my brother, called me again. Only this time, he sounded different. Hey, he said, voice low. I need to talk to you. In person. I met him at a diner halfway between his place and mine. He sat across from me in a hoodie and baseball cap like he was hiding. Dad's spiraling, he said. He's been drinking more, losing control. The board's distancing from him. And I don't know, Em. I think he might actually lose everything this time. He already did, I said flatly. Daniel looked up. I found something, he said. It's in an old file cabinet in his lake house office. It's got stuff in there I think you need to see. I didn't speak. I didn't even blink. He reached into his backpack and slid me a flash drive. I shouldn't have waited this long, he said. But you were right. About everything. The flash drive held scanned letters, old emails, meeting transcripts, and one document that made Vanessa's jaw drop when I showed it to her. A board memo from 8 years ago, confirming that my father personally blocked the promotion of 3 women, citing emotional volatility as his reason. It was dated the same year he told me I wasn't cut out for law school. That sealed it. Not just discrimination, but a documented pattern from his own hands. The countersuit was dismissed within 2 weeks of us filing that document into the system. And just like that, the legal war ended, but the emotional one still lingered. Months passed. The dust began to settle. Marisol got hired as a compliance officer for a major firm in Chicago. Janelle launched a Women in Leadership podcast that blew up on Spotify. And me? I got a call from a university in Austin. They wanted me to come speak to their first-year law students about emotional strength, about resilience, about truth. The dean said, they need to see what real leadership looks like. I stood at that podium, staring at a sea of young faces, and I told them, I was told that my feelings made me weak. That passion was a flaw, that standing up made me dramatic. I paused, but what I've learned is that emotion, when rooted in truth, is not weakness. It's courage. It's power. And it's the reason I'm standing here today. They gave me a standing ovation. I cried. And I didn't apologize for it. Later that week, I got a letter in the mail. From my mother. I hadn't heard from her in over a year. The envelope was handwritten. No return address. Inside, a single note. You're still my daughter. But I don't know who you are anymore. I folded the note and placed it in a drawer. Not out of anger, but peace, because I knew exactly who I was now, and I didn't need her to say it. Vanessa and I kept in touch. She offered me a spot at her firm after I graduated. Come build something new, she said. And I said yes, not because I needed her, but because I wanted to keep doing the kind of work that mattered. The kind that changed things. One last thing happened. Before the end, my dad, now living in a condo he couldn't afford, no longer CEO, no longer powerful, tried to reach out. He sent a letter through his attorney, apologizing. Sort of. I still don't agree with how you handled things. He wrote, but I can admit now that I underestimated you, and I regret that. I didn't reply, but I kept the letter, because part of healing is remembering, not for pain, but for clarity. And that clarity, it built something beautiful. Because from the ashes of everything he tried to ruin, I built something stronger, my career, my voice, my life. All because someone once called me too emotional, and I decided to prove them wrong, not with silence, but with fire. Starting over sounds beautiful and moving, but in real life, it's slow. It's lonely. It's quiet in the most uncomfortable way. After the case ended, and the media lost interest, I went back to being just another law school graduate. No more headlines. No more viral tweets. No more courtroom buzz. And I realized I had no idea how to live a regular life anymore. Vanessa had offered me a position at her firm, yes, but it didn't start for another 3 months. And in those 3 months, I had to figure out who I was without the chaos, without fighting, without needing to prove something. The first few weeks were hard. I didn't sleep much. I ate toast for dinner more nights than I'd like to admit. I kept checking social media, like I was expecting someone to still talk about me. No one was. It was quiet, and that scared me. Because I had been running on fire for so long, I forgot what it was like to just exist. Then, slowly, I started doing things I hadn't done in years. I took walks, I bought groceries without rushing. I painted terribly, I might add. I went to a bookstore and sat on the floor for 2 hours reading poetry. And one morning, I woke up and didn't check my phone. That was the first day I felt free. Daniel, my brother, called one evening and asked if I wanted to come to a barbecue at his place. It felt like a trap at first, but he assured me, it's just us. No dad, no mom, just family. So I went. He and his wife Emily, yeah, same name. It's been a running joke, had set up string lights in their backyard. Kids ran around with sticky hands and faces full of ketchup. The smell of grilled corn and smoked ribs filled the air. For a moment, I forgot everything, until his wife came over and said, "Daniel told me what you did." That took guts. I smiled politely. "It took years, I believe it," she said. "He was scared too, to speak out, to go against your father, but what you did helped him grow a spine." Daniel looked over and rolled his eyes. "Gee, thanks, babe." We laughed, and I realized some healing was already happening. Even if it didn't look like a movie, I started volunteering at a local women's shelter. At first, I just helped with legal paperwork, custody filings, employment disputes, restraining orders. But slowly, the women started asking for me by name. "I want the one who took down her dad's company." I'd laugh, but deep down, it felt like purpose, not revenge, not ego, just something that mattered. One afternoon, a woman named Rosita came in with 2 kids and a black eye. She barely spoke English, but her eyes told the whole story. I walked her through the steps, filed for a protective order, found her emergency housing, helped get her on a job training list. She cried when I handed her the final documents. I told her, "You're going to be okay," and I meant it, because helping her helped me too. Then, the fellowship offer came. It was from a nonprofit I'd applied to a year ago and completely forgotten about. They'd seen my case in the news. They wanted me to travel, speak at schools, advise on discrimination policies, help reform legal structures in underrepresented communities. It felt unreal. I was going to lead something, build something, my own name, my own mission, no one else's legacy hanging over me. I called Vanessa to tell her, expecting her to be disappointed. She wasn't. "Go," she said. "You earned it. You don't owe me anything, but I want to work with you," I said. "And you will," she replied. "Later. But right now, you need to build you." Packing for that new job felt different than anything before. I wasn't leaving home in tears. I wasn't running from a fight. I wasn't proving anything. I was just living. I kept one box of memories: the newspaper clipping of the court verdict, a photo of my law school graduation, a copy of that hateful memo my father wrote, not to remember the pain, but to remind myself what I overcame. And one letter from Marisol. She'd sent it right after the case ended. It read, "You gave me back my dignity. I'll never forget that. The world needs more Emilys." On my first day at the nonprofit, I walked into a room full of people from every background imaginable: immigrants, first-gen students, single moms, war veterans, and every single one of them looked at me like I belonged there. Not because of my last name, not because of my education, but because I had walked through the fire and come out alive. I introduced myself like this: "My name is Emily Vaughn. I'm here because someone once said I wasn't strong enough to lead. They were wrong." And that was all I needed to say. 6 months into the job, we were invited to speak at a national policy forum in Washington, D.C. I was nervous, but I knew my story. I stood on that stage in front of hundreds of policymakers and told them bias doesn't always look like shouting. Sometimes it whispers through boardrooms and emails and hiring decisions. But it's there, and we need to fight it not just with laws, but with stories, with truth, with action. It aired on C-SPAN. And that night, my mom texted me for the first time in 2 years. "I saw you on TV," she wrote. "You looked strong. I'm proud of you." I didn't know what to say. So I just replied, "Thank you." That was it. And then came the full circle moment. A law school in Houston invited me back to speak. The same building where my father once told me I wouldn't survive. I walked through those halls with my chin high, heels clicking, a small crowd of students following behind me. The dean pulled me aside before my talk. "You've inspired a lot of young women here," she said. "There's even a scholarship named after you now." My eyes welled up, but I smiled and said, "Good, because they're going to change the world." After the event, I stayed behind for a bit, alone in the classroom where it had all started, where I once sat, silent, afraid, unsure if I was good enough. Now, I stood tall, not perfect, not healed overnight, but whole. And I realized something. Being too emotional had never been the problem. Being underestimated had. And now, no one could make that mistake again. It had been almost a year since the courtroom battle ended. And yet, some nights, I still dreamed of it. The wood-paneled walls, the sharp smell of paper and ink, my father's cold eyes across the room, my own heartbeat echoing in my ears as I stood to speak. But now, I didn't wake up in a panic. Now, I woke up knowing those dreams were just echoes, not chains. Not anymore. The fellowship work had changed me, deepened me. We weren't just pushing policy. We were hearing people, women who had lost jobs because they were too pregnant. Young men turned away because they wore nail polish. Single mothers questioned about their stability in courtrooms. We weren't lawyers anymore. We were translators of pain, of injustice. And in all that noise, I had found my voice. One morning, while running a workshop at a small university in Missouri, I got an email from a name I hadn't seen in years. Trevor Sinclair. My ex. The one who had walked away when things got hard. The one who said I needed to cool down when I cried about my father. The subject line just said, "Coffee?" I stared at it for 10 minutes. Then deleted it. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't need to reopen that chapter. Some people are meant to be lessons, not lifelines, and I had already passed the test. But not all ghosts stayed buried. A few weeks later, I was invited to speak at a corporate leadership panel in New York. I accepted. It was a chance to address big-name companies on diversity, hiring bias, and emotional intelligence in leadership. As I walked backstage flipping through my notes, a woman tapped my shoulder. "Emily?" I turned. It was her, Linda Ferris. My father's former head of HR, the woman who had turned a blind eye when those women were passed over, who had once called me a little dramatic. She looked smaller than I remembered, grayer, nervous. "I just wanted to say," she started, "you were right about all of it." I didn't respond right away. So she added, "I resigned last year. I couldn't be part of it anymore." Still, I said nothing. "Anyway, I'll be listening today. Good luck." And she walked off. When I stepped onto that stage, something inside me clicked. I wasn't just telling my story anymore. I was telling theirs. "People like to use the word emotional like it's an insult," I said, looking into the crowd. "But being emotional means we care. It means we feel. And those feelings? They've built movements. They've rewritten laws. They've saved lives. Applause. Real, loud, lasting." That night, as I walked alone through Times Square, I looked up at the glowing billboards and thought, my dad told me I couldn't handle the pressure. But this felt like mine. Then came the job offer I wasn't expecting. A law firm in San Francisco. Not just any firm, one of the top 10 in the country. They wanted me to lead a new division focused on civil rights and corporate discrimination cases. 6 figures. A team. Total freedom. I should have jumped for joy. Instead, I froze, because taking that offer meant leaving behind the grassroots work I'd come to love, the shelter visits, the handwritten thank you notes, the small, quiet victories. It also meant moving back to the West Coast, closer to my family, closer to the memories, and possibly the confrontation. I called Vanessa. Take it, she said. No hesitation. You can't change the world if you burn yourself out trying to do it all from the bottom. But the nonprofit work will still be there. She interrupted. You built something real. Now use that credibility to create change on a bigger scale. I hung up and thought for a long time. Then, I called back the next morning and said yes. San Francisco felt like a fresh page. The fog rolling in over the bay each morning, the sound of streetcars, the energy of a city always in motion. My office had a window overlooking the Golden Gate. And for the first time in my career, people called me boss. Not girl, not intern, not sweetheart, not even associate. Boss. And I wore that title like armor, not to feel powerful, but to protect the people who didn't yet have power. My team grew fast. 3 months in, we were handling some of the biggest internal bias cases in California. And then a file landed on my desk. Carson Holdings. A former accountant had filed a whistleblower complaint. I stared at the name. Same font, same logo, same company I once took to court. But this wasn't about my father. He'd been gone for nearly 2 years now, quietly living in Arizona, off the radar. This was about the new leadership. Turns out, the rot hadn't stopped with him. It had just shifted forms. Slicker, smarter, hidden under pretty mission statements and polished branding, but still rotten. And I knew this wasn't coincidence. This was a test. I met with a whistleblower myself, a man named Kevin, mid-30s, nervous, sweaty hands. They've been covering up fraudulent bonuses, he told me. Inflated numbers to shareholders, lying to investors. And the worst part? They're blaming women in accounting for the discrepancies, trying to pin it all on them. I listened quietly, took note, and then asked, "Are you ready to go public?" He hesitated. "I have 2 kids," he said. "A mortgage. They'll destroy me." I nodded slowly. "I understand, but I won't let them." We built the case carefully, quietly, months of documentation, interviews, financial reviews. I never once contacted my father, but somehow, he found out. One afternoon I got a package at the office. No return address. Inside was a single folded page, his handwriting. "Whatever happens, I didn't protect that company to the end, but maybe you can destroy what's left of it. And maybe that's the only apology I can give." It wasn't much, but it was something. The case made national headlines, not just because of the company name, but because of the woman leading the charge. Emily Vaughn versus Carson Holdings. Again, one outlet wrote. But this time, the tone was different. This time, they weren't doubting me. They were rooting for me. I won't spoil what happens next just yet. That's a story for another part. But I'll tell you this. It was never about revenge. It was about restoration. Not burning it all down, just tearing out the rot and planting something better in its place. And I finally understood what Vanessa meant when she said, they didn't know who they raised. Because now, they did. And this time, they couldn't look away. The morning of the Carson Holdings trial, San Francisco was wrapped in fog. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my blazer, the same one I wore in my very first courtroom win. But today didn't feel like a repeat of the past. It felt like a new beginning. This wasn't about me anymore. This was about the people they hurt. The women they tried to scapegoat. The whistleblower they tried to silence. I tucked the letter my father had written into the inside pocket of my bag. Not because I needed it, but because it reminded me why I fought. Because I could have walked away. But I didn't. Court was packed. Reporters, investors, even a few old employees of the company. I caught sight of Marisol in the 3rd row, sitting beside 2 of the young interns from our nonprofit days. She gave me a small nod. The moment the hearing began, the opposing counsel, A sleek man in an overpriced suit named Gregory Chase stood up and started with one sentence. "There is no crime here, just a disgruntled employee with an axe to grind." I didn't flinch, because I'd heard it all before. Gregory spent the next 40 minutes painting Kevin, the whistleblower, as bitter, unstable, and overly sensitive. Sound familiar? They even brought up his therapy visits, as if mental health disqualified you from honesty. And when they were done tearing him down, they smiled like it was over. But then I stood up, and I showed them the evidence. We had spreadsheets, doctored numbers, emails, asking junior staff to reclassify bonuses, audio recordings. One executive saying, "If the women get fired over this, that's just business." It was clean, it was tight, it was undeniable. And when I finished my closing argument, I looked right at the judge and said, "We are not emotional, we are not unstable, we are not vengeful, we are right, and that is enough." The room was silent. Gregory fidgeted. Kevin's hands trembled, but my heart was steady. The court ruled in our favor. Massive fines, public apology, terminations. Carson Holdings' stock dropped 42% in 3 days. They'd recover maybe, but not with the same people, not with the same blind arrogance. And for the first time, they were the ones forced to make statements. They were the ones scrambling. The tide had turned, and I'd helped make that happen. After the verdict, I walked out to flashing cameras. A reporter shoved a mic at me. "Emily, this is your second takedown of Carson Holding. What's next for you?" I smiled and said, "Maybe I'll get some sleep." They laughed. But that night, I didn't sleep. I cried, not out of sadness, but out of release, because it was done, not just the case, but the part of me that still doubted if I'd made the right choices. A week later, I got a message from my dad's lawyer. He wanted to meet, not for legal reasons, just a talk. I almost said no, but then I thought about closure, so I agreed. We met at a quiet coffee shop in Sedona, Arizona. He looked older, smaller, no suit, no slicked back hair, just jeans and a windbreaker. I sat down, unsure of what to say. He beat me to it. "You made it," he said. "I did. I watched the trial." He added, "You were good. Better than you ever thought I'd be." I said. He didn't argue. Instead, he said, "You were always better than I could handle." That scared me. That hit me harder than I expected. He continued, "I wasn't a good father or a good man. And when you started shining, I didn't know how to let go of the power, so I tried to dim you." Silence. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I needed to say it out loud. I looked at him for a long time, then said, "I didn't come here to forgive you. I came to say I'm okay." He nodded, and we sat there, sipping lukewarm coffee, like two people who finally saw each other clearly, not with anger, not with regret, just with truth. When I got back home, I received a package in the mail. No return address. Inside, an old VHS tape and a note. "Found this in the storage unit. Thought you should have it." It was a home video from my 8th grade spelling bee. I'd forgotten it even existed. There I was, in glasses too big for my face, hair a frizzy mess, spelling the word tenacious. When I got it right, the camera panned to my dad clapping, not smiling, not cheering, just nodding. But now, years later, I saw something different in that nod. Recognition. Even then, he knew. Back at work, things were growing faster than I could manage. We hired 3 new lawyers, brought on a full-time mental health advocate, and partnered with 5 universities for pipeline programs to support underrepresented law students. One of our first interns, a girl named Jada, first-generation college student. Brilliant, fiery. She reminded me of me. One night after hours, she poked her head in my office. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How do you deal with the pressure, like knowing your work is changing people's lives?" I thought for a moment, then said, "You remember that you're not doing it alone, and that it's okay to feel too much. Feeling is power." She nodded slowly, then added, "I hope I can be like you someday." I smiled. "You'll be better." Vanessa called a few days later. "Still changing the world," she teased. trying to. We should have dinner. It's been too long. We met at the same rooftop bar where she once offered me my first real job. She raised a glass and said, "To the girl who was too emotional, and to the woman who turned that into fire." I clinked my glass and replied, "To the mentor who saw it first." And for once, I allowed myself to feel proud. There's a quote I keep on my desk now. It's carved into a small block of wood. My brother made it for me for Christmas. It reads, "She was warned, she was ridiculed, but she did it anyway." And every time I look at it, I remember the girl who cried after her first law exam, the woman who walked into court against her own family, the lawyer who chose people over power. Me. The office was quiet on a Sunday morning. Sunlight poured in through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting soft gold on the framed photo behind my desk. Me and my team standing outside the courthouse after the Carson Holdings verdict. I looked so different in that picture. Still me, but not quite the same. Because now I didn't have to prove anything. I just had to do it. The firm had grown fast. Too fast, maybe. We were now handling cases in 5 states. We had a waiting list, and the pressure had started to creep in again. Not in the form of self-doubt, but in the form of expectations. From the public, from the media, from every client who looked at me like I was going to save them. And some days I felt like I could. Other days I barely had the strength to answer emails. But I remembered what Vanessa once told me. The goal isn't to be everything to everyone. It's to be someone to someone. So I made a change. I stepped back. Not all the way, but enough. I gave more power to my associates. Let Jada lead her first case. Encouraged younger women in the office to take the mic, speak up, run strategy meetings. It was terrifying, but it was also beautiful. Watching them shine, watching them take up the space I'd once been afraid to step into. One afternoon I got a call from a journalist. They were doing a piece for The Atlantic about emotional intelligence and power, and they wanted to feature me. I almost said no. I didn't want to be a headline again, but something told me maybe it was time. So I agreed. We met in a quiet cafe in Berkeley. The journalist, a woman named Nina, opened her notebook and said, "So, tell me the moment everything changed." I laughed. "Which time?" She smiled. "Fair. But if you could go back and tell your younger self something, say the day you got rejected from that first law internship, what would it be?" I didn't even have to think. I said that being emotional isn't your weakness. It's your compass. She paused, her pen still, then nodded slowly. The article came out 2 weeks later. It was called "The Woman Who Weaponized Her Heart." It went viral. Not just in legal circles, but in places I never expected. Teen forums, mental health communities, even on TikTok. Messages poured in. From students, from single moms, from women in male-dominated industries who said they finally felt seen. One girl wrote, "I used to be embarrassed about crying in meetings. Now I realize I cry because I care. And that's not weakness. That's leadership." I read that one twice, then printed it out and pinned it to my office corkboard. Weeks later, I got another letter. Handwritten. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting right away. It was my dad's. Again. This time, the letter said, "You changed the world more than I ever built it." I thought power came from control. "You proved it comes from compassion. I hope you'll forgive me someday. But even if you don't, I'm proud." I cried. Not because it hurt, but because it didn't anymore. That summer, I flew to Boston to give a keynote at Harvard Law. Standing in front of all those students, some wide-eyed, some hardened by life, I told my story. Not the edited version. The real one. The part where I nearly gave up. The part where I screamed into my pillow after every rejection. The part where I thought being too much meant being not enough. And then I said, "Your empathy is not the problem. It's the cure." The auditorium went silent. And then the applause started. After the talk, a girl approached me in the hallway. She was probably 21. Brown curls, nervous energy, holding a small notebook. "Hi," she said. Sorry, do you have a second? Of course, I smiled. I just wanted to say, I didn't think I belonged here. My family doesn't believe in therapy. They think feelings are weak. I almost dropped out last year, I nodded gently. But you didn't? No, she said, eyes watering. Because of you. We hugged. And in that moment, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. Back in San Francisco, something unexpected happened. I got a letter from the board of Carson Holdings. They wanted to donate to our firm's nonprofit arm. As part of a public rebranding effort, sure, but also as a gesture of good faith. They wanted to sponsor internships, training programs, scholarships for women in law. It took me a while to decide. Part of me didn't want their money, but then I remembered something my mom used to say when I was little. You don't have to accept the apology, but you can accept the change. So I said yes. On my terms. Every dollar would go directly to programs that uplifted girls like me, and none of it would erase what they did. But maybe it could build something better. Jada knocked on my door one day with a grin. You busy? Always, I smirked. She held up a folder. We just got accepted to argue a case at the Supreme Court. My heart skipped. We weren't just fighting small battles anymore. We were changing systems. And now, we had a seat at the table. Sometimes, I visit that old cafe in Sedona, the one where I met my dad after everything fell apart. I sit at our old table, order the same coffee, and write. Not legal briefs, not strategy plans, just thoughts, memories, because I want to remember where I came from, the fire, the doubt, the heartbreak, the moment I stood in front of my father and said, I'm okay, and meant it. There's one last part I want to share. It happened during a quiet Saturday morning. I was watching the sunrise with my niece, my brother's daughter. She was 7, bright, stubborn, curious. She looked up at me and said, Aunt Emily, are you famous? I laughed. Maybe, a little. Did you fight bad guys? I thought about it, then said, I fought people who thought they were better than others. She tilted her head. Did you win? I looked at her healthy, safe, growing up in a world I helped change, and said, yeah, I did.